Spring, 1753. Alongside the Thames at Twickenham, 18 miles from London's chaos, a Gothic castle rises from English meadowland. Not medieval, not ancient, brand new. 47 rooms of pointed arches, catafalque windows, and battlemented towers constructed deliberately to look 5 centuries old. Cost: £20,000 over 30 years, approximately £3.5 million in today's currency. But this isn't a nobleman's seat. It's a bachelor writer's fantasy, built by a man who never married, never governed, never commanded armies. Why would Horace Walpole spend his entire inheritance creating an elaborate stage set? And what happened when the curtain finally fell? Stand at the entrance today and you're looking at England's most influential architectural experiment. Strawberry Hill House doesn't overwhelm with size. It's intimate, almost cottage-like compared to the Baroque palaces of Walpole's contemporaries. The asymmetry catches your eye immediately. Towers rise at irregular heights. Windows refuse to align. The roofline zigzags unpredictably. Everything contradicts the Georgian order dominating 18th century England, where symmetry was sanity and classical proportions were moral law. The walls are rendered in white stucco, brilliant against the green lawn sloping toward the Thames. On sunny afternoons, the light catches the crenellations, those decorative battlements marching along the roofline, casting shadows that move like medieval soldiers. Approach closer. The entrance is modest, almost secretive, as if the house is revealing itself reluctantly. This was intentional. Walpole wanted arrival to feel like discovery, not announcement. Inside, the great parlor stops visitors cold. The ceiling is a cascade of papier-match fan vaulting, white and gold, impossibly delicate, modeled after the tomb of Edward the Confessor in Westminster Abbey. It shouldn't exist in a private home. It shouldn't be made of paper and plaster. But there it hangs, defying gravity and convention, a theater set frozen in 3 dimensions. Walk through the gallery 90 feet long, lined with crimson damask and portraits of martyred royalty. The ceiling here replicates the Henry VII chapel, also from Westminster. The fireplace is copied from Archbishop Warham's tomb at Canterbury Cathedral. Every surface is stolen from somewhere sacred, something ancient, something that whispers of monks and crusaders and Britain before Britain existed. But Strawberry Hill was never about living practically. No kitchens on the ground floor. They were banished to a separate service building. Bedrooms barely accommodated beds because beds weren't theatrical. Walpole hosted hundreds of visitors annually, conducted tours personally, published a detailed guidebook so strangers could appreciate his references. The house was performance art before the term existed, a 3-dimensional manifesto arguing that emotion and imagination mattered more than reason and order. The cost wasn't just financial. Strawberry Hill consumed Walpole's entire adult life. 30 years of construction, 1747 to 1776. Overlapping almost exactly with the American Revolution he watched from his Gothic windows. While colonists rebelled against Georgian rigidity, Walpole was building an architectural rebellion in his own garden. He called it a little plaything house. Others called it madness. But it sparked a movement that would reshape Britain's architectural identity and export Gothic revival to every continent. How did one eccentric bachelor's obsession become one of the most consequential buildings in English history? And why, after his death, did it spend 2 centuries sliding toward oblivion, silent and nearly forgotten, before being pulled back from the edge? Horace Walpole was born with every advantage except the one he wanted most: legitimacy. Born in 1717, he was the youngest son of Britain's first Prime Minister, Robert Walpole, a man who embodied the Enlightenment's cold rationality. Young Horace inherited money, connections, a seat in Parliament that required no effort, and an annual income of approximately £3,000, enough to live comfortably without working. What he didn't inherit was power, influence, or his father's respect. So he turned inward. While his older brother managed estates and political ambitions, Horace collected. First it was books, then prints, then curiosities, fragments of medieval stonework, stained glass salvaged from demolished monasteries, suits of armor, miniature portraits. By his 30s, his London residence overflowed. He needed more space, but more importantly, he needed a statement. In 1747, Walpole leased a small cottage in Twickenham called Chopped Straw Hall, a ridiculous name he immediately changed to Strawberry Hill. The location was perfect. Close enough to London for visitors, far enough for privacy. The Thames provided romantic atmosphere. Alexander Pope's villa stood nearby, connecting Walpole to literary prestige. He began renovations immediately, but renovations doesn't capture what happened next. Walpole assembled a committee he called the Committee of Taste, Gentlemen Friends, including John Shute and Richard Bentley, who shared his medieval obsession. They met regularly, sketching, debating, rifling through antiquarian books for architectural details to copy. This wasn't archaeology. They felt no obligation to historical accuracy. They cherry-picked elements from different centuries, different regions, even different countries, combining them into fantasy compositions that never existed in the Middle Ages. The construction method was revolutionary. Instead of stone, which required massive foundations and structural engineering, they used modern materials disguised as ancient. The vaulted ceilings were papier mâché on wooden frames. The pinnacles and tracery were carved wood, painted to resemble stone. The effect was theatrical, deliberately artificial. Walpole wasn't trying to fool anyone, he was creating a stage for imagination. The architecture reflected his psychology. Walpole existed between worlds. Too intellectual for aristocratic society, too aristocratic for intellectual society. Gay in an era when homosexuality meant execution, he navigated dangerous waters through coded friendships and elaborate discretion. Strawberry Hill became his refuge, a place where he controlled everything: the aesthetics, the guest list, the narrative. He documented obsessively. Letters describe every purchase, every construction decision, every visitor's reaction. In 1774, he published a description of the villa of Horace Walpole, essentially a guidebook to his own home, explaining each room's sources and intentions. This wasn't ego, it was pedagogy. He wanted Britain to understand that Gothic architecture wasn't barbaric, wasn't primitive. It was sophisticated, emotional, and profoundly English in ways classical architecture could never be. But Walpole didn't know that his creation would outlive his control. He couldn't foresee that Strawberry Hill would become famous for a novel he wrote in 1764, The Castle of Otranto, the first Gothic horror story in English literature. The novel was inspired by a nightmare he had while sleeping in his Gothic bedroom, a giant helmet crashing through the staircase. That novel, dashed off in 8 weeks, would define a literary genre and cement Strawberry Hill's reputation as the birthplace of Gothic imagination. Construction continued for 3 decades because Walpole kept expanding. A new tower here, another gallery there, always more rooms for more collections. By 1776, when America declared independence and Walpole's political career evaporated, Strawberry Hill was complete at last. He was 59 years old. He had built himself a monument. What he hadn't built was a plan for what came after. Behind Strawberry Hill's romantic facade, the arithmetic turned brutal. The house required constant maintenance. Papier mâché ceilings sagged with humidity from the Thames. Wood painted to resemble stone rotted when water infiltrated. The decorative battlements, purely ornamental, with no defensive function, caught wind like sails, requiring perpetual repair. Walpole spent approximately £500 annually on upkeep, roughly £85,000 in modern currency, year after year after year. Staffing was equally demanding. Despite the house's modest size, it required a permanent staff of 12: housekeeper, butler, cook, footman, maids, gardeners, a librarian for Walpole's 8,000-volume library. These weren't servants maintaining a functioning household. They were curators maintaining a museum that happened to have a resident. Every surface required dusting by hand with soft brushes to avoid damaging the delicate plasterwork. The crimson damask walls faded in sunlight and had to be replaced every decade. The stained glass windows, cobbled together from medieval fragments, leaked and required specialized glaziers. Then there was the social cost. Walpole was essentially operating Britain's first house museum. By the 1770s, Strawberry Hill was famous. Aristocrats, scholars, and curious tourists arrived constantly, expecting tours. Walpole, to his credit, usually obliged. He wrote detailed instructions for visitors. Appointments required, parties limited to 4 people, specific routes through the house to control flow and protect fragile objects. But the intrusion was relentless. Some days he conducted 3 separate tours. His letters overflow with complaints about the strawberry hordes and the daily invasion. The collection itself became a prison. Walpole's thousands of objects, paintings, miniatures, enamels, ivory carvings, medieval armor. Charles I's death warrant demanded cataloging, conservation, and security. He published a catalog in 1784, running to 2 volumes meticulously describing every item. But the more famous the collection became, the more vulnerable he felt. Theft was a constant anxiety in an era without alarm systems. Fire terrified him. One spark and the papier match interior would explode. Financially, Walpole remained secure through most of his life due to his parliamentary sinecure and inherited wealth. But he never married, had no children, and watched anxiously as his nephew, the heir to the Walpole estates, descended into debt through gambling and mismanagement. What would happen to Strawberry Hill when he died? Who would maintain it? Who would understand it? The house also isolated him. As Walpole aged into his 70s, infirmity confined him increasingly to Strawberry Hill. His friends died one by one. The Gothic fantasy that once felt liberating began feeling like a mausoleum. In letters from his final years, he describes wandering the gallery alone at night, looking at portraits of dead friends, surrounded by architecture that demanded constant attention but provided no warmth. There was also the question of relevance. By the 1790s, Britain was convulsing with revolution anxiety. France had guillotined its aristocracy. Gothic architecture, which Walpole introduced as playful and romantic, was being weaponized by a younger generation into something darker. Novels like The Monk and The Mysteries of Udolpho took his aesthetic into territories of sexual violence and anti-Catholic hysteria that horrified him. Strawberry Hill was being misunderstood, reinterpreted, used in ways he never intended. And then there was the practical impossibility of succession. When Horace Walpole died in 1797 at age 79, Strawberry Hill passed to Anne Damer, a sculptor and close friend, but she couldn't afford it. The house was sui generis, too eccentric for aristocratic living, too fragile for institutional use, too expensive to maintain as a private residence. Within 7 years, she returned it to the Walpole family, who promptly began planning its liquidation. The hidden cost of building a dream was becoming clear. Dreams don't transfer ownership. They die with the dreamer. In 1842, the Walpole family made a decision that nearly destroyed Strawberry Hill forever. They held an auction. Not just of the contents, the entire collection, every painting, every miniature, every fragment of medieval glass, every piece of furniture Walpole had commissioned to match his Gothic vision. The sale lasted 32 days, 4,000 lots. Collectors, dealers, and museums descended like locusts, stripping the house of everything that made it significant. The auction catalog survives, a 450-page document that reads like an autopsy. Charles I's death warrant sold for £80. A Holbein miniature went for £200. Medieval stained glass purchased by the foot. Furniture designed specifically for particular rooms scattered across England and Europe, divorced from context. The British Museum acquired some items. Private collectors hoarded others. Much vanished into obscurity. Strawberry Hill itself stood empty. a stage without props, architecture without purpose. The papier-match ceilings sagged without climate control. Rain infiltrated through the ornamental battlements. Vandals broke windows. Locals treated it as a curiosity, occasionally venturing inside to carve initials into Walpole's library paneling. In 1847, the house found a temporary savior, Frances Waldegrave, who married into the Walpole family and became Countess Waldegrave. She renovated extensively, but her vision was Victorian, not Walpolean. She added wings, modernized bedrooms, installed gaslight, and used Strawberry Hill for lavish political entertaining. Her parties were legendary. Dickens attended, along with politicians, royalty, and intellectuals. But this was Strawberry Hill as backdrop, not destination. When Frances died in 1879, the house passed through a succession of owners who viewed it as increasingly burdensome. The 20th century was nearly fatal. The house was divided into apartments. A Catholic college took partial ownership, carving up rooms for educational use. The structure deteriorated. The great parlor's ceiling partially collapsed. The gallery's crimson damask rotted. The exterior stucco cracked and fell in chunks. By the 1980s, Strawberry Hill was on English Heritage's at-risk register, one bureaucratic step away from demolition consideration. Scholars lamented. Walpole's influence on architecture and literature was undeniable. Gothic revival had transformed Britain's churches, universities, and Parliament itself. The Houses of Parliament, rebuilt after an 1834 fire, were designed in Gothic revival style, directly inspired by Strawberry Hill's popularity. Yet Walpole's own house, the origin point of this architectural revolution, was crumbling into the Thames Valley mud. The crisis exposed an uncomfortable truth. Britain had never known what to do with Strawberry Hill. It wasn't grand enough for National Trust priorities. It wasn't old enough for medieval preservation societies. It was too specific, too personal, too weird. Its significance lay not in intrinsic value but in influence. It mattered because of what it inspired, not what it was. And protecting influence is harder than protecting stone. By 2004, the situation was desperate. The roof leaked catastrophically. The papier-match ceilings, exposed to moisture, were disintegrating. Surveys revealed structural instability. Without intervention, Strawberry Hill would be lost within a decade, not to demolition, but to slow-motion collapse. Then came the decision that would save it, a £9 million restoration lottery grant, supplemented by heritage organizations and private donors. It was one of the largest restoration projects in British preservation history, proportionally enormous for a house of such modest size. But the argument prevailed. This wasn't just a house. It was an idea made physical, and the idea mattered. Today, visitors walk through Strawberry Hill and encounter something unprecedented. A house that looks almost exactly as it did in 1776, returned from the edge of oblivion. The restoration, completed in 2015, was forensic. Conservators studied Walpole's descriptions, his letters, his 1774 guidebook. They analyzed paint layers, wallpaper fragments, and architectural drawings. Where original materials survived, they were stabilized. Where materials had vanished, they were meticulously recreated using 18th century techniques. The papier-match ceilings were the greatest challenge. Modern conservators mixed paper pulp using historical recipes, sculpted by hand, painted with authentic pigments. The result is simultaneously ancient and new, a ceiling that looks 250 years old, but will last another 250. The crimson damask walls were rewoven on period looms. The stained glass, scattered by the 1842 auction, couldn't be recovered, but new glass was commissioned that honors Walpole's aesthetic without pretending to be original. Strawberry Hill operates now as a museum and educational center, managed by a charitable trust. 20,000 visitors pass through annually, not the strawberry hordes Walpole complained about, but enough to justify the space and fund ongoing maintenance. Guided tours follow Walpole's original roots. The house hosts academic conferences on Gothic literature, architectural history, and 18th century material culture. But the deeper legacy extends far beyond Twickenham. Strawberry Hill proved that architecture could be personal, emotional, and deliberately historical without being fake or regressive. It demonstrated that style was a choice, not an inevitability, that rejecting classical order wasn't barbarism but liberation. This idea spread like fire through Victorian Britain. Churches abandoned classical porticos for pointed arches. Universities built Gothic quadrangles. Even private homes embraced asymmetry, towers, and decorative excess. Globally, Gothic revival became colonial architecture's dominant style. From Melbourne to Mumbai, from Toronto to Cape Town, Gothic buildings announced British cultural authority. The Houses of Parliament became an export, replicated in legislatures worldwide. All of this traces back to a bachelor's eccentric villa on the Thames, built as a private joke that became a public movement. In literature, the connection is even more direct. The Castle of Otranto invented a genre that never died. It evolved into Frankenstein, into Dracula, into every haunted house story, every supernatural thriller, every narrative where architecture itself becomes a character. Contemporary horror films owe debts to Walpole's nightmare about a giant helmet. Stephen King's The Shining is Strawberry Hill's distant descendant.